What is your name?
My name is David Setzer.
How old are you?
Ooh, older than dirt. No, seriously. I was born in October of 1939, so if I live to October, I'll be 75 years old. So I'm 74.
Where were you born?
I was born in the old Marion General Hospital on James Drive, which is now James Apartments, and just up above City Hall in Marion.
How did you get your start in newspaper business?
Well, I sort of tried a lot of things before I got there, but I still got into it as a fairly young man. I had worked in a couple of grocery stores, on a laundry truck, on a milk truck, as a shoe shine boy in the barber shop, at a garage and service station, changing oil and pumping gas, and in a textile mill for a short period of time, and commercial lending as a banker for a short period of time, and then I got hired with what I loved and stuck with, and that was newspaper.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience working for the newspaper?
Yes. I was working at the Northwestern Bank when I was hired to join the newspaper staff. Mr. Gentleman by the name of Mr. John Setzer owned the newspaper at that time. No relation to me. I was an old Fort Setzer, and he was a South Carolina Setzer that had moved here from Columbia, South Carolina, and bought the McDowell News. He came here in the 40s, 43 or 44, 1943 or 44, and bought the paper, and ran it for a number of years with some excellent help that he inherited, Ms. Rosamond Brawley, Brawley, I can't remember Lee's last name, very active here at the Senior Center.
Huey, yes.
Lee Huey is Rosamond's daughter, and Rosamond was the editor of the paper. A gentleman by the name of Jim Klutz was the photographer and sports writer for the paper, so he had some good help. But John only had two children. He had a son and a daughter, and they lost their mother at a young age and went into private school and away to school. And I think he had always hoped that his son would come into the business and take it over, but his son became a minister, a Presbyterian minister. So he hired me to come and go to work for him. And people would see me, and he'd introduce me, and they'd say, "Is this your son?" Because his son had been gone for a number of years, and a lot of the local folks didn't know him or didn't remember him. And he'd say, "No, but he's got a good name." I had the opportunity to work with him until his health failed him after 3 or 4 years, and after 2 or 3 more years, he sold the newspaper. But I remained with the buyers and spent a total at the McDowell News of 34 and a half years, and got shipped out to Mississippi for a period of about 8 and a half years to further my experience and training. And that was actually my first management job out there. I'd been in sales and sales management until I went to Mississippi. And then I became an editor and a publisher and a manager of a newspaper, and really got the experience there that brought me back to Marion and landed me the job that I remained in for 18 and a half more years, from 1988 until I retired in 2007. So.
Can you remember any stories or any events that occurred while you were a newspaperman that still stand out today?
Yes, certainly. I remember when the Cross Mill Church burned on a Saturday, and at that time we only worked skeleton staff on Saturday, and it happened to be my Saturday to be there. So I got a call that the church was burning to grab a camera, and at that time we used the old huge 4x5 speed Graflex with the film in the holder. Said, "Go upstairs and get the camera and get you a couple of film loaded holders and go out and make pictures of the church fire." So I closed up the office and went and became an unofficial beginning photographer that day. That was very exciting, just to be a part of it. The Royal Hill fires, because I was a fireman, I got to experience that firsthand. We had a number of fires there, but the disastrous one that completely burned the old plant portion itself and a warehouse across the street from it was one that the call came in shortly after noon on a Wednesday, and I took the second truck to that fire and stayed there until about 3 o'clock in the morning until I got relieved and sent home. From 2 p.m. until 3 a.m. the next morning. So that was a very memorable night and experience. I missed out on some other big events just simply because of my work assignment when the old prison fire occurred at the low security prison down. I was in Old Fort covering a Little League All-Star baseball game, writing the story and doing the photography for it. And you know, the great thing about working for a small newspaper is I got the opportunity to wear a lot of hats and experience a lot of things that in a big city newspaper, a person never would have had that opportunity. They would have been stuck at a desk all day writing stories and doing the same thing over and over. But one of the exciting things about the newspaper business is I made a habit all through my career of evening before going home, I'd make me a to-do list for the next day, an agenda for the next day. And it's amazing the number of times that I didn't get a chance to look at that agenda from the time I went in that next day until I left that next day, because you never knew what was going to happen when somebody opened the door and came in. It was a brand new experience, a brand new challenge, and a brand new and exciting job. You just didn't have a chance to get bored. And that was particularly true in a small town newspaper. Somebody might come in with a 5-pound sweet potato that they'd grown in their garden and want you to make a picture of it. And of course, in a small town newspaper, that's big news. It wouldn't get in a city newspaper, but it was interesting. Or if you had a potato that looked like Aunt Sarah's big toe and foot, and they wanted a picture of it, then you got to make a picture of it and do a story about it. And all the crazy things that happened, well, you got to be a part of it and party to it and a witness to it. And so it made it a very exciting career. There's so much change from the time I started in the newspaper industry in 1964 to today that it's hardly believable. Some people say that newspapers face a bleak existence, that they're going out of business, but I think there's always going to be a need for a newspaper. It's just going to be different, I think. It may be more localized and niche products serving markets that want it locally. They're going to get their world news and their international news off the internets and TVs and from their wristwatches, all kinds of sources. But there's still going to be, I think, a place for the printed word. But we went from that with the hot metal type, and the plates were 42 pounds each, and you put each one on the press. And I mentioned that I did the agenda and how interesting newspaper work was. You know, that's the only thing in the world that I can think of that prints a product, puts it together, and then comes along and tears it down completely and starts all over. So every newspaper was a new challenge and a new beginning. And then you completed that, you tore it down, and you started all over again. And that kept it fascinating. But because it was so hard to do at first, that's why we had 1 and 2 newspapers a week. And then later we expanded and had 3 days a week, and now we're only up to 5 days a week in McDowell County. Then from that we went to the old linotype machines that they set the type on were bigger than an upright organ. You know, huge machines, and the magazines on them that held all the different sizes of type, italics, caps, lowercase, had to be interchanged manually. So that's why I think men were the primary linotype operators. And then once they got a line type, they had to lift the bar and send it over and pour the hot metal in it and let it shave it and trim it. And then that page was put together a slug at a time, a column at a time, with 20 or 21 or 22 letters on it, and they made up a newspaper that way. And they were still using wood type when I started in the career, so that some of the big capital letters were wooden cutout letters. And of course they were all reversed, because then once you roll your mat or make a matrix of it and then make a curved plate of it, it had to be reversed and then back to a positive, to a negative, back to a positive. And then we put ticker tapes on the linotype machines, or put them on a typewriter that would run the ticker tape and then take it and put it on a machine and an adapter there. The operator disappeared, but the machine would sit there and the keys would fall because the ticker tape was still dictating the composition of the story, the writing of the story. And then from there we went to early computers. In the early 80s, the first thing that I had that was computerized was a little Radio Shack Tandy keyboard that had 2 lines of type on it, and that's all you could see, that's all you could work with. And then it had no memory or output. You just simply used it as a portable typewriter. So I could, if I was on a trip and my wife would drive, I could sit there and write a column or a story covered last night's city council meeting, write it on that on that little machine while she drove, and then I'd take it in and hand it to somebody that would attach it to a computer, and they would output it. But we had no newspaper programs. We were using a book type called Red Ryder, was the type that we were using initially in the early 80s. And then it was the Max, and then from there it's gone plumb out of sight. And now so much of it's electronic that it's nothing like it was when I started. But I think there's always going to be a newspaper, but who knows what shape and form it's going to be in, or how we're going to produce it, or where the information is going to come from. But in my experience, I saw about 4 or 5 generations of newspaper manufacturing, from the hot type to the early computerization to the internet to, hey, what's next?
David, can I ask you, of all those,
Yes.
besides the newspaper business before then, of all those other jobs that you had, was there any one that you look back on and say, you know, I really enjoyed doing that?
Well, I forgot to mention that I spent 3 summers in construction work, and I really enjoyed that. 2 of them in Maryland, Washington, D.C. area with a small construction company, and then a year with Mr. Gilbert Hollifield from Marion remodeling the old Fort School, the auditorium, and the building in front of the auditorium. We completely redid that summer. So it was fun. And I really thought about construction work as a career. So it was fun. It was challenging. You just enjoyed getting up and going to work every morning, and you felt good at the end of the day when you finished what you'd done and looked back to see what you'd accomplished.
Can you tell us about your first job?
The first job I had, I was really very young, and I grew up in a family without a father. My mother raised 3 children, and so we sort of got us started at an early age. And a neighbor ran a little neighborhood grocery store that we traded at some, and so I made their acquaintance, and they offered me a job. And I don't remember, but I think that I was either 10 or 11 years old. And the first day there, they put me to dusting a snuff shelf. Now, you kids don't know what snuff is, but it's that foul stuff that people used to put in their mouths and spit. And most of the time it was packaged in paper. And a lot of times the paper would get broken and the snuff would get scattered on the shelf, and that was a mess. But that's the first day's work. And I stuck with it until it was after school, and I stayed with it until I didn't quite get finished. And it was Mr. Harris's grocery store in Old Fort, Mr. Ralph Harris, and he and his son Jimmy ran the store. And at the end of the day, Jimmy came over and looked, and I think he was inspecting my work, and he said, "Well, you've done a pretty good job, but you didn't quite get through." He said, "I guess you can come back tomorrow and finish it up." So that started my career in the grocery store business. And I'd bag groceries and put up stock and sweep the floor, carry groceries out to the car. That was something that was done at that time. And my first job was really with the idea of helping Mama, because she worked in the lunchroom for a very, very low salary. There were 4 of us, and so it was not easy. We had the cow, we had a hog, we raised a garden, we put up and canned as much stuff as we could. There wasn't a lot of refrigeration and ways to preserve food at that time. You canned it or ate it, so we all worked. My brothers and sisters also worked, and to help Mom. And she was such a strong person and such a good person.
What was being a volunteer fireman like?
That was like being in the closest knit, tightest brotherhood that one would ever be in. There's something, because I worked next door to the fire department, their building was attached to ours at one time. The old City Hall and McDowell News buildings were connected with a common firewall. So at first, I could not get into the fire department because it had only 25 members, and it was mainly a father and a son organization. the father would be there for his career, and then he would be followed by his son, and the turnover just didn't leave any room for many outsiders. And though I worked next door and lived within a block or two of the fire department, I never got invited to join. But I'd always run over when the alarm would go off, and they used to have a loud horn that sounded all over the town, because the firemen at that time didn't have radios or pagers to know where the fire was. So they had signals that would direct the firemen to go to the east side of town or the west side, or else you'd have to go to the department and look at a blackboard or bulletin board to tell you where the fire location was. And I would always run over excitedly to see where the fire was, and it might be something that we needed to send somebody from the paper to cover. But finally, Marion got the opportunity to expand their fire district from just a city department to a 5-mile radius and become the Marion Area Fire Department. And that allowed them to increase their membership by state regulations from 25 members to 35 members. So 10 of us got to go in as new firemen at the same time and take our training and become rookie firemen. But by that time, I was 40 years old. I was a middle-aged fireman before I began. But that was very exciting. I enjoyed working with the men in the department. I became a training officer for my company. I became a lieutenant of my company and later a captain. I was a captain in the fire department as a volunteer. I never received any pay for it, except the city did give us free water. We didn't have to pay a water bill if we were a volunteer fireman. So that was a little concession, and we'd have the rides to come to town, as they still do, and make our own money so that we could have a meal now and then and a Christmas party. But when you put your life on the line with another man or several men to go inside a burning building, knowing that your life depends on their expertise and their bravery, and they're doing what they have to do, and the same thing exists with them. They're depending on you. You really form a firm bond. It's a kinship like no other that I've ever experienced. And some of my dearest and best friends are firemen that I served with. And if I had to face any challenge, I'd as soon have those men at my side as anybody in the world.
Tell me about your training being a fireman, David.
Well, we had our own training. We were required to take 36 hours a year to keep our certification as a fireman and keep our insurance up with the state. And departments, new startup departments, had a need for instruction, and I was a training officer for my own department and later a lieutenant and a captain, as I said earlier. And it required me to spend a lot of time studying and boning up and preparing to do my job. And as an outgrowth of that, I was asked to and encouraged to take the training to become a state certified fire service instructor, which I did, along with a couple of other guys in the department. And we taught an awful lot of classes around McDowell County and other places. I especially enjoyed going out and working with new and young departments. We worked with the North Cove Department in the wintertime and had some air pack training and had nowhere to train except in their station house. So we had the men to put tinfoil over the mask so they couldn't see, but we could leave the lights on and watch them, put on an air pack, and crawl under a truck. Well, you couldn't crawl under a truck with an air pack on your back, so they'd have to learn how to undo that air pack and take it off, push it ahead of them, and crawl under the truck, put the air pack back on, and hook it back up and continue to breathe off of the air tanks. And that was in case they got entrapped in a building sometime and needed to know how to get out of that equipment and save their own life and maybe the life of their fellow firemen or some others, victims. And of course, in fire service training, the thing that we're trying to teach is save a life first and save property next. And I always said, saving a life, gentlemen, begins at home. Save yourself first, and then save any others that you can. And so that's the basis on which we approached our statewide training. And I worked from Wilson, North Carolina, at the state fire training ground at that time, to helping to build and establish a training ground in McDowell County. Worked at the Brevard Training Center and a number of departments, new startup departments in Linville, They had no fire department, and I worked with them with their first basic course. We trained in the upstairs of Grandfather Mountain's office building at Linville for them to have a fire department, and they built a fine fire department over there. So very enjoyable work. And I earned a little bit of money, which helped me with 3 children and facing college.
Please tell us about your work with the Scouts.
Okay, I started working with the Scout troop while I lived in Old Fort still, and I was quite young. I was married and had a child, but she was a girl, and I got involved as a Boy Scout leader. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the outdoors. I enjoyed working with the boys, and I stayed with it until I took the job in Marion and wound up and moved to Marion. So it was not convenient to continue my scouting experience at Old Fort, but I got asked to join and help with the Scout troop at the First Methodist Church here in Marion. And I did, and worked with some great career scouters and got a good start at an early age. And finally, at the time I was about 25, we had 3 children, my wife and I, and one of them was a son, the last one. So I had an excuse and a reason to be a Boy Scout leader, rather than maybe a den mother. but I enjoyed working with the Scouts in the outdoors. I had a number of troop positions. I was neighborhood commissioner, I was a roundtable commissioner, I was assistant scoutmaster, I was scoutmaster, I was leadership training coordinator, camporee chairman, all the local jobs that they could think of and saddle me with. I tried it, but I enjoyed most of it, and it was fun. And I still enjoyed camping and the smell of wood smoke and seeing a campfire and thinking about sleeping on the ground. But I want a better air mattress now than I had then. But scouting was really, really fun. And then, of course, I got to experience it as my son grew up and became a scout. And I had not had an opportunity to be a scout except for about 6 months when I was a boy. When I was 11 years old, I joined the scout troop in Old Fort. And we met at the then community building, which is now the Mountain Gateway Museum. And it was wintertime and very cold. There were 2 fireplaces in that building, one at each end of the building. And we'd go and build a fire there and try to huddle around and stay warm, but that didn't do very well heating that old cold building on the creek there. So we would wind up playing steal the flag or some running game around the area to try to stay warm for the period of time that we were there. But after about 6 months, I had attained tenderfoot, second class, and had earned 2 merit badges and was almost a first-class scout, except lacking swimming. And we didn't have an indoor pool in McDowell County then like you folks have at the Y today. So it was a matter of waiting for springtime or summertime to hope that I could pass the swimming test and get my first class and continue on in my career in scouting. But we lost our leadership. The leader was a school teacher, and at the end of that year, he retired and moved away and went back to his hometown, and no one would take over the troop. So I didn't get to finish what I was really enjoying and what I started as a boy. So I guess I sort of leapt into it to get back into scouting when I had the opportunity as an adult. And I've tried very hard to make sure that the boys didn't have the disappointment that I had of losing the opportunity of being a scout and an Eagle Scout because of a lack of adult leadership. So altogether, I spent about 34 years as an adult scouter after a 6-month stint as a Boy Scout. But I'm real proud to report that my son did attain the rank of Eagle and made a good scout, and I'm very proud of his accomplishment in watching him do it and being a part of it because I was there for much of it.
Please tell me about your hobbies.
Well, the outdoors, you've heard I like to camp and I like to fish. I like to hunt. Just about anything in the outdoors because it's so beautiful and there's so much to experience and enjoy out there. And we can preserve a few things as we go along and do some good perhaps. But anything to do primarily with the outdoors. I'd like to make another statement. I said that I grew up in a family without a father, but now my mother had a lot of help. She was a member of a family of 10 children. She had 7 brothers and 2 sisters. And so I had a lot of family, strong mentors. My granddaddy made sure that I learned a strong work ethic at a very young age. And if he thought I didn't have anything to do in the summer, he would invent something for us to do. We'd cut pulpwood, or we'd make a garden, or we'd cut firewood, or he taught me to use a double bit axe and a crosscut saw and plow with an Oliver turning plow and do some things that otherwise, except for his pushing me, I would never have had the experience to learn that. And I even had the experience of learning how to milk a cow when I was a senior in high school. And I was quite proud of that fact, that I learned that art. That was something that I'd never had the opportunity to do. When I was very small, we did have a cow of our own, but I never learned to milk. I was too young. But later on, I did get to milk for an aunt who was getting on up in years and needed some assistance, and I'd milk her cow for her every morning before going to school. And it was just an accomplishment that I was proud that I had learned and was able to help her out with that. So another thing, because so many people helped us, you've heard the saying that it takes a village to raise a child. That's really true. And Old Fort had a very strong village that helped me in so many ways and so many people that I could live to be 100 and I couldn't pay back all the people that did me big favors when I was growing up. So many people helped to mentor me, teachers, people in the church, just community members at large, neighbors. I wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for all the good turns that I have been done by other folks. And I could never pay them all back.
Thank you for letting me interview you today, David.
Thank you. I've enjoyed telling you my story, and I hope that one of these days that I'll get to hear yours and it'll be as exciting as mine has been.